The entity known across the Imperium as a Dreadnought is not a creation born from innovation or curiosity, but a response to necessity. Where other war engines are constructed purely for power projection or tactical superiority, the Dreadnought carries a deeper significance. It is both a weapon and a sarcophagus. Within its armoured bulk slumbers a mortally wounded warrior who can no longer live independently, yet whose combat skill, loyalty and service are deemed too valuable to lose. This synthesis of machine and relic serves as a reminder of the Imperium's inability to waste any resource, even in death, and its cultural obsession with preserving martial legacy. Through this chapter, the origin, mechanical design, operational doctrine, and social implications of the Dreadnought will be explored as an archival dissection of a rare but vital component of Imperial warfare. The earliest appearances of Dreadnoughts can be traced back to the Age of Technology, a time before the rise of the Emperor and the founding of the Imperium. Though no standardized Dreadnought form existed then, the basic idea, entombing a biological entity within a mechanical warframe, has technologic echoes dating to this era. The Men of Iron, synthetic intelligences created to serve humanity, were ultimately rejected and destroyed, yet some records suggest that early cybernetic hybrids combining organic and mechanical interfaces were trialled alongside them. These experiments would eventually inform mechanicum research centuries later, especially during the rise of the Adeptus Astartes under the Emperor's guidance. The Dreadnought, as it became formally recognized, was developed as a means of battlefield preservation. Astartes warriors who had served with exceptional distinction but suffered mortal injury could continue their duty by being interred within these heavily armoured sarcophagi, ensuring their tactical knowledge and combat skill remained active long after their organic death. The biological aspect of a Dreadnought is unique within the Imperium. While many machines are automated or controlled remotely, the Dreadnought is fully piloted by a living consciousness, though the term living is applied loosely. The interred warrior is typically suspended in a state of near-death stasis, sustained by artificial life support and neurological links that interface directly with the war machine. These warriors no longer experience conventional biological functions. They do not breathe, digest, or reproduce, and over time their sensory experience becomes increasingly limited to what the sarcophagus allows. Physical deterioration continues, albeit slowed by technology, and the mind remains active only through the regular engagement of combat, ritual stimulation, or periods of machine-assisted sleep. Without these, madness becomes a distinct possibility. A Dreadnought is therefore not merely a tool of war, but a psychological anomaly, wherein human willpower is all that holds back the total disintegration of identity. Standard Dreadnoughts range in height from around 10 to 12 meters, depending on the variant. Their mass exceeds 10 tons due to reinforced adamantium armor plating, internal reactor cores, hydraulic actuators, and mounted weaponry. Inside, the pilot rests in a reinforced stasis cradle, surrounded by nutrient fluid, neurological interface ports, and armor plating designed to shield even from internal reactor overloads. Most Dreadnoughts are capable of walking upright on two massive legs and feature two weapon arms, typically a combination of close quarters and ranged options, such as power fists, storm bolters, robotays, or assault cannons. Despite their size and weight, many Dreadnoughts can reach surprising speeds when engaged, supported by internal gyroscopic balancing and stabilized servo motors. The interface between machine and pilot is not entirely seamless, and many Dreadnoughts exhibit signs of lag in response or erratic movement, particularly when engaged after long periods of inactivity. The behavioral patterns of a Dreadnought vary depending on the mental state of the interred pilot and the conditioning they receive between deployments. Most retain the discipline and clarity of their former selves, functioning as cold, tactical assets. However, the isolation, pain, and recurring exposure to combat can degrade mental stability over time. Older Dreadnoughts, especially those awakened only in dire moments, may suffer from fractured memory, aggression, or melancholia. The first mass deployment of dreadnoughts occurred during the Great Crusade, where the need for persistent leadership on the battlefield created an opportunity to extend the service life of veteran Astartes. Many of the earliest dreadnoughts were former captains, champions, or librarians whose skill and experience were seen as too valuable to lose. Some dreadnoughts from this era still exist today, their minds preserved across thousands of years. They are regarded with a blend of reverence and awe, their memories containing first-hand accounts of the Crusade, the heresy, and the evolution of the Imperium itself. These ancients are rarely awakened, as their deterioration makes each deployment a risk, but when they walk, entire enemy formations collapse under the weight of their legacy. The military doctrine surrounding dreadnoughts is highly specific. Most chapters of the Adeptus Astartes deploy them sparingly, using them to spearhead assaults, hold key positions, or counter specific threats such as enemy armor or heavy infantry. A dreadnought is rarely deployed alone unless it possesses sufficient firepower to act independently. More commonly, it is supported by infantry, devastator squads, or mechanized armor. Tactical use also varies by chapter. The Salamanders may deploy dreadnoughts as immovable firebases, while the Blood Angels use Furioso pattern units in high-speed shock assaults. Space Wolves often emphasize close combat, fielding units like the venerable Dreadnought, Bjorn the Fell-Handed as avatars of divine wrath. Prominent examples exist across nearly every major Space Marine chapter. Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves is among the oldest known Loyalist dreadnoughts, having served directly under Primarch Leman Russ. His continued function is considered both a technological miracle and a spiritual omen. In the Blood Angels, the dreadnought Brother Raphaen has earned honour in centuries of brutal campaigns, carrying forward the genetic legacy of Sanguinius. The Ultramarines field multiple dreadnoughts bearing the honoured dead of Macragge, each inscribed with battle records and scripture. These individual units are given names, records and liturgies, their identities preserved across generations. Dreadnoughts are not anonymous vehicles but known entities within their chapter's mythos, often holding more prestige than a living battle brother. Victory and defeat milestones associated with dreadnought deployments are well documented. In the defense of Cadia, numerous dreadnoughts from the Imperial Fists and Black Templars held breach points for days against overwhelming traitor legions and demonic incursions. In the Damocles Gulf Crusade, dreadnought firepower was critical in destroying entrenched Tau positions, otherwise immune to standard Astartes armament. Yet they are not invincible. The fall of Medran Guard saw over a dozen Iron Hands dreadnoughts destroyed by targeted orbital bombardment and demonic artillery. The loss of a dreadnought is considered a significant spiritual and strategic blow, requiring rites of mourning and mechanical reclamation by tech marines. The culture surrounding dreadnoughts is layered, rooted in the deeply ritualistic nature of the Adeptus Astartes and the machine cult of Mars. Unlike tanks or aircraft, dreadnoughts are treated as living relics, often housed in sanctified vaults or cathedrams deep within chapter monasteries. These vaults are quiet, dark, and filled with the scent of sacred oils and inscribed parchment. Servitors perform continuous maintenance and cleansing rites, while tech marines offer incantations and prayers to appease the machine spirit and the warrior's slumbering mind. Many chapters will adorn a dreadnought's chassis with iconography not only of the Emperor and the Omnissiah, but also the personal heraldry of the entombed warrior. Skulls, purity seals, parchment scrolls, and engraved scriptures cover much of the external plating, transforming the machine into a shrine of war. It is considered heretical to treat a dreadnought as mere equipment. Each is revered by the chapter and often remembered during rites of remembrance and oaths of battle. Within the social structure of a chapter, dreadnoughts occupy a unique position. Though physically removed from daily operations and chain of command, their presence carries immense symbolic weight. A dreadnought is typically addressed with titles of respect such as Ancient, Revered Brother, or Venerable. Their voices, when they choose to speak, are projected through vox systems that amplify age, gravitas, and pain, creating an aura of both wisdom and warning. When conscious, they may serve as advisors to captains or chaplains, offering first-hand accounts of ancient campaigns or tactical insight formed across centuries. Younger Astartes often train under their observation, absorbing tales and doctrines that predate even the oldest living veterans. While most dreadnoughts are not part of the formal command hierarchy, their words carry enormous influence, and their advice is rarely disregarded. In extreme cases, a dreadnought may even be granted temporary field command when their experience outweighs all others present. Values held by dreadnoughts tend to align with those of their chapter, but are filtered through long experience and a deeply personal understanding of loss. They often speak less of glory and more of duty, perseverance, and sacrifice. Rituals associated with their awakening or deactivation are highly structured. Awakening a dreadnought typically involves incense, chanting, and formal authorization from senior officers and tech marines. It is not a routine action, but a momentous occasion that is recorded in chapter logs. Upon deactivation, the machine is cleaned, anointed, and guided back into dormancy, with prayers intended to preserve the pilot's sanity. In chapters like the Dark Angels or Iron Hands, where secrecy or machine integration are emphasized, these rituals may include encrypted data seals or communion with Nuspheric cogitator networks. Internal divisions among dreadnoughts themselves are rarely discussed openly, but they do exist. Some chapter archives record friction between ancient interred warriors and current command structures, particularly if a dreadnought's worldview no longer aligns with modern doctrine. This is more prevalent in chapters with long, storied histories or those that have experienced ideological schisms. For example, a dreadnought interred before the Horus Heresy may express a level of doctrinal rigidity or disdain for post-heresy changes, leading to quiet reassignment or reduced deployment frequency. In the Iron Hands, the gradual fusion of flesh and machine may lead some dreadnoughts to question their remaining humanity, while others fully embrace their new existence as an ideal state of service. These variations are rarely made public, but they are noted in internal data vaults for consideration by chapter leadership. The philosophical relationship between dreadnoughts and technology is complex. Most dreadnoughts are maintained not only by the chapter's tech marines, but also under the oversight of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The designs of dreadnoughts, particularly the Contemptor pattern and Derideo pattern, are based on ancient standard template constructs from the dark age of technology, which means that few truly understand how they function. The fusion of living flesh and sacred machine requires the use of banned or barely sanctioned technologies, including cortical implants, neural binders, and sarcophagic preservation fields. The Mechanicus considers the dreadnought a marvel bordering on heretical innovation. While revered, these machines are also feared. Tech priests performing maintenance must do so with a level of reverence akin to operating on a revered martyr. Each system is connected not just to machine spirits, but to the psyche of a living, damaged warrior. The technological layout of a standard dreadnought includes a reinforced ceramite and adamantium shell, servo motors capable of lifting tanks, and weapon hardpoints that can mount a range of armaments. Internally, life support systems manage nutrient flow, neural stimulation, and waste filtration, while armored conduits protect the pilot from feedback during weapon discharge. Most dreadnoughts are powered by internal plasma or fusion reactors, with backup energy cells to sustain the pilot's stasis if the core is disabled. The interior is filled with a mixture of sacred lubricants and ritual compounds that preserve the organic form and reduce cognitive dissonance during neural engagement. Navigation systems include short-range augers, threat sensors, and tactical overlay displays projected directly into the pilot's optic nerves. Repairs can only be performed at a chapter forge or under the supervision of an Adeptus Mechanicus Magos with relevant clearance. The loss of even a minor component is considered sacrilege unless immediately replaced with a sanctified substitute. Deployment patterns of dreadnoughts vary widely depending on chapter traditions. The Ultramarines, whose doctrine values structure and codification, deploy dreadnoughts according to tactical demand, usually in support of armoured spearheads or defensive holds. The Blood Angels and their successors, whose combat style emphasizes aggression and emotional fury, often awaken dreadnoughts for high-impact shock actions. In contrast, the Iron Hands treat dreadnoughts almost as spiritual leaders, deploying them as living testaments to the superiority of steel over flesh. Some successor chapters, particularly those without extensive technological infrastructure, may rarely deploy dreadnoughts due to the difficulty of maintaining them. In these cases, dreadnoughts become more symbolic than practical, preserved as relics of a more technologically capable past. Civilian interaction with dreadnoughts is nearly non-existent. Their presence is confined to war zones, chapter fortresses, or sacred vaults. However, when witnessed by Imperial citizens, during parade, liberation, or last stand defense, the effect is profound. Most civilians mistake dreadnoughts for gods or avatars of the Emperor's wrath. Stories spread rapidly, sometimes inaccurately, of giant metal warriors wielding divine fury. Ecclesiastical authorities often reinforce these beliefs to bolster morale, though the Adeptus Astartes themselves rarely encourage such myths. Within the chapter, however, reverence remains grounded in earned respect. Dreadnoughts are not gods but brothers, wounded, burdened, and enduring. The preservation and production of dreadnoughts are limited by rarity and complexity. Creating a new dreadnought is a multi-phase process requiring both organic and technological components. The first condition is the availability of a suitable candidate, a mortally wounded Astartes whose brain function, loyalty, and psychic stability are intact. This alone disqualifies the vast majority of battlefield casualties. Second, the sarcophagus must be prepared. This involves crafting or sanctifying a dreadnought frame, often an ancient chassis preserved from millennia past. New constructions are possible but extremely rare, requiring approval from both chapter leadership and the Mechanicus. Third, the ritual of interment is performed. This includes surgical extraction from damaged armor, neural bonding, initiation rites, and often the presence of a chaplain to offer final spiritual guidance. The process is invasive and irreversible. Once interred, the warrior cannot return to a humanoid body. They are a dreadnought forever. In this way, dreadnoughts represent more than machines or even warriors. They are a culmination of imperial philosophy, duty that endures beyond life, sacrifice extended across centuries, and the refusal to waste a single asset in the endless war for survival. They are trapped between worlds, no longer human, not entirely machine, yet still bound to the same oaths that once gave them purpose. As the Imperium faces ever greater threats across its fractured territories, the slow awakening of ancient dreadnoughts may offer not only tactical advantage but forgotten knowledge, fragmented truths from battles fought 10,000 years ago. Whether such awakenings offer salvation or a grim reflection of past failures remains undecided. The psychological state of a dreadnought pilot is a carefully monitored variable, equal parts sacred and volatile. Unlike newly initiated Astartes, whose minds are molded over time into rigid channels of faith and discipline, dreadnought pilots often experience profound cognitive dissonance upon awakening. This is not a failure of the sarcophagus interface, but a consequence of memory and identity surviving long past its intended expiration. Most have died at least once, and what remains is a mind forced into lucidity inside a coffin of metal. The result is often a slow erosion of personality into either extreme stoicism or isolated madness. Chapters with strong psychological support rituals, such as the Space Wolves or Salamanders, tend to manage this better. Those that do not often rely on extended stasis periods between deployments, letting the pilot's mind rest in silence for centuries before being stirred once more. Language and communication between dreadnoughts and their handlers involve a combination of traditional Low Gothic, sacred cant from the Mechanicus, and chapter-specific battle dialects. The voice of a dreadnought is filtered through ancient vox relays that deepen and distort the tone into something resembling a seismic tremor. Despite their limited verbal interaction, some dreadnoughts become famed for unique phrases or declarations, often recited by younger Marines like parables. In some rare cases, Interred warriors maintain dry wit or philosophical musings, their memories having become abstracted through time. These personalities are not always welcome. Chapters like the Imperial Fists, who value stoic discipline, may limit a Dreadnaught's unsanctioned dialogue, whereas the Raven Guard may permit such individuality, viewing it as a trace of the warrior's original soul. In terms of chapter-specific variations, certain Dreadnaughts differ dramatically in both behaviour and battlefield application based on the traditions and technological resources available. The Dark Angels, for instance, enter only their most loyal and silent warriors, often chosen from the elite Deathwing. These Dreadnaughts are rarely seen by outsiders and never deployed without strategic intent. Their presence is not merely martial, it is often tied to missions involving the hunt for the fallen. By contrast, Space Wolves refer to their Dreadnaughts with great familiarity, even reverence. Known as Ancients or Old Ones, these figures retain far more personality, and it is not unusual for a Space Wolves Dreadnought to argue strategy, or openly insult younger warriors during mission briefings. In extreme cases, such as Bjorn the Fell-Handed, a Dreadnought may even assume the role of a chapter's spiritual cornerstone, becoming a living link to pre-heresy times. Outside the Codex-compliant chapters, Forge Worlds have been known to construct and house Dreadnoughts of radically different configurations, sometimes bordering on Heertech design. These non-Astartes Dreadnought variants, while rare, do exist in Mechanicus or Inquisitorial records. Examples include deep mining chassis converted into pseudo-Dreadnoughts on Forge Worlds, lost to war or experimentation with psychically responsive sarcophagi intended for alpha-level psychers. The Ecclesiarchy, despite lacking direct access to Dreadnought designs, has commissioned their own blessed engines styled after saints and martyrs. These constructs are symbolic and do not function like true Dreadnoughts, but they reflect how the concept has taken root across Imperium-wide theology. In some isolated regiments, stories exist of Dreadnought-like constructs operated by non-Astartes through rudimentary interface protocols, a dangerous and likely heretical practice that the Inquisition suppresses when discovered. The training rituals used to prepare a Space Marine for possible Dreadnought interment are almost non-existent, because no warrior is expected to survive such a fate. However, some chapters do emphasize mental conditioning that includes meditation, detachment from pain, and legacy planning. This ensures that if a warrior is interred, he's already prepared to think of himself as a custodian of chapter memory rather than an individual. Tech Marines are taught the rites of interface calibration, neural stabilization, and linguistic reprogramming, allowing them to manage cognitive drift and psychoneural dissonance. Chaplains are trained to read signs of instability and offer both spiritual and chemical sedatives during interactions. In extreme cases, a Dreadnought may be declared spiritually unfit and sealed permanently, kept only as a relic, never again awakened. Relationships between Dreadnoughts and their Tech Marines are highly structured. Tech Marines view the sarcophagus not merely as a machine, but as a sanctified intersection between man and mechanism, soul and steel. When performing rites of activation or repair, the Tech Marine must recite both canticles of ignition and the chapter's rite of remembrance. The first is intended to appease the machine spirit, the second to calm the pilot's residual humanity. Over decades, bonds may form between Tech Marines and specific Dreadnoughts. Silent mutual respect built on familiarity with ritual, personality quirks, and battlefield reliability. However, the Tech Marine must always prioritize duty over emotion. If a Dreadnought becomes unstable or begins to resist deactivation cycles, it is the Tech Marine who must initiate containment, even termination. This responsibility is rarely spoken of, but it is one of the gravest burdens a Tech Marine may bear. Strategic impact assessments place Dreadnoughts as force multipliers rather than standalone siege engines. While capable of reshaping battlefields, their true value lies in their tactical versatility. They can suppress heavy infantry, hold choke points, counter enemy armor, and provide fire support without requiring supply chains or rest. Their presence also serves a morale function. For enemies, it is demoralizing. a relentless metal warrior with no fear or hesitation. For Allied forces, it is an icon, a walking relic of glory and survival. In battlefields where communications have broken down and leadership is lost, the sudden roar of a Dreadnaught's autocannons or the sight of its advance through flame and ruin often reconstitutes command structure through sheer presence. Additionally, Dreadnoughts are sometimes used in symbolic roles during planetary reclamations. Upon retaking a lost city or fortress, a chapter may have a Dreadnought lead the first step back onto sacred soil, especially if the pilot fought during the location's original loss. In this way, history is made tangible. Some Dreadnoughts have returned to battlefields they last walked 1,000 years before, completing long unfinished tasks. These acts are recorded in both chapter and imperial archives, with ceremonial inscriptions added to the Dreadnaught's armour. Such moments reinforce the Imperium's belief in eternal duty. No task is ever truly abandoned, and no warrior ever fully dies while his service remains unfinished. From a galactic logistics standpoint, the distribution of Dreadnoughts is uneven and often hidden. Larger chapters with greater access to Forge World alliances maintain small contingents of varying patterns. Chapters like the Ultramarines or Iron Hands have documented dozens, while smaller or more embattled chapters may possess only one or none. The Death Watch maintains a few Dreadnoughts for operations requiring heavy boarding actions or deployment in Xenos-contaminated war zones, although these are rarely publicized. The Grey Knights are known to operate psychically shielded Dreadnoughts optimized for demon hunting, although exact numbers remain classified. Across the wider Imperium, Dreadnoughts are among the most carefully inventoried military assets. If one is destroyed and cannot be recovered, a formal inquiry and ritual of mourning is performed. In some cases, entire strike forces have been risked to retrieve a fallen Dreadnought sarcophagus, prioritizing its recovery over the mission itself. This depth of reverence, utility, and psychological weight makes the Dreadnought a singular entity in Imperial warfare. It is not simply a machine, not merely a warrior, it is the bridge between ancient glory and ongoing sacrifice. Chapters guard them, pray over them, and build doctrines around their limited presence, and when the enemy sees them rise, firestorms erupt, and a slow, implacable death descends on the battlefield. Behind every footstep lies history. Within every weapon discharge echoes the last memory of a fallen brother still fighting. The earliest sanctioned records regarding Dreadnought deployment appear within the war annals of the Unification Wars on Terra, particularly in relation to prototype exoframes used by the Emperor's Thunder Warriors. These pre-Astartes constructs, rudimentary in design but conceptually identical, served as inspirations for what would later evolve into the first Dreadnoughts of the Legions Astartes. Terra's mountainous war zones, where high-altitude artillery required durable close-range suppression, proved fertile ground for mechanical augmentation. However, the Thunder Warriors' frames were not true Dreadnoughts. They lacked sarcophagus integration and were operated externally or via crude neural shunts. It wasn't until the dawn of the Great Crusade that the first true Dreadnoughts, those bearing interred warriors, entered sanctioned combat records under the direct command of the Emperor's favoured legions. The earliest confirmed deployment of a sarcophagus-bearing Dreadnought occurred in the years 26 of the 31st millennium, as noted in the annals of the 3rd Legion during the Fail campaign. A warrior named Argon Rune, grievously wounded during an orbital boarding assault, was placed within an experimental frame developed by the Martian Mechanicum. This sarcophagus prototype was known as the Contemptor pattern, and Rune's operational lifespan extended for 23 standard years before his final termination during the Ulanor pacification. His machine became the baseline for further refinements. Administratum records of Rune's combat data, compiled and filed by a scribe cohort assigned to the 865th Expeditionary Fleet, are still stored beneath Segmentum Solar's High Archive, marked under Restricted Access Level Sigillum 5. Dreadnought integration expanded rapidly across the Legionis Astartes during the early Great Crusade. By the mid-30th millennium, all legions possessed multiple chassis, with varying degrees of specialization depending on alliance status with the Martian Mechanicum. The 5th Legion, White Scars, were recorded using fewer dreadnoughts, citing philosophical reluctance and combat speed doctrine. The Horus Heresy represents the single greatest period of recorded dreadnought-on-dreadnought conflict in galactic history. With legions split and their dreadnoughts forced into fratricidal combat, entire archives were generated cataloguing these engagements. During the Siege of Terror, dreadnoughts were used to hold breach points within the inner walls of the Imperial Palace. One notable record, signed by Master Archivist Grendel Oron of the Administratum's Terraean Defense Bureau, details the final stand of Brother Captain Varnax of the Imperial Fists, interred in a Contemptor chassis, who single-handedly held the Lion's Gate for 4 standard hours against 3 Death Guard Leviathan units. His sarcophagus was ultimately breached, but the wreckage was recovered, and a transcript of his last communications was inscribed onto a plinth in the Phalanx's internal reliquary. In the aftermath of the heresy, many dreadnoughts were lost, corrupted, or sealed away by loyalist chapters. The Codex Astartes, authored by Robert A. Gilliman, significantly restricted dreadnought deployment rates, codifying them under specialist classifications and enforcing stricter rights of activation. Administratum deployment charts from the post-heresy Reformation show that most chapters were assigned no more than 10 operational dreadnoughts at a time. Requisition for additional sarcophagi required explicit authorization from both the local Forge World and a chapter master. Many dreadnoughts from the heresy were quietly buried or sealed beneath chapter fortresses, deemed too mentally unstable for further service. Others, particularly those interred shortly before or during the heresy, became honoured relics, awakened only during dire planetary threats. Across the following millennia, dreadnoughts appeared in most major engagements involving Astartes deployments. During the War of the Beast in the 32,000th millennium, dreadnoughts were used to breach the armour plating of the massive Orc War moons. Official Administratum records note the use of modified Leviathan chassis capable of functioning in hard vacuum and high radiation environments. These units were dropped via gravitic insertion onto moon fortresses and served as spearheads for orbital boarding actions. A fragmentary log from Captain Ryler of the Crimson Fists includes a notation that the ancients walk beside us in silence, and death follows their every step. The Battle of Adamantua saw the destruction of 11 dreadnoughts, with 7 sarcophagi irretrievable due to structural collapse and atmospheric venting. Throughout the following 10,000 years, individual conflicts began to include more specialized dreadnought applications. In the Gothic War, dreadnoughts were deployed aboard Black Templars battle barges as storming vanguards during Chaos Fleet boarding actions. The official war record designated them as purification engines, with their activation requiring combined authorization from both the ship's tech marine and chaplain. In one record, a single dreadnought, interred with a former sword brother named Kalen Thorne, is said to have cleared an entire deck of a Chaos cruiser in under 6 minutes. Vox transcripts from the boarding party were appended to the record, but redacted after inquisitorial review. The Damocles Gulf Crusade provides further documentation of dreadnought use against Xenos technology. In engagements with Tau-armoured units, dreadnoughts were recorded to be less effective in open terrain due to the Tau's advanced target lock and high mobility doctrine. Administratum assessments from the Ultramarines' 10th Company reported that dreadnoughts functioned best in dense urban zones, where Tau line of sight was restricted. Chassis were retrofitted with reactive armour plates and electromagnetic shielding to counter pulse weaponry. Combat logs show that losses were high, but sarcophagi were recovered in 89% of cases, a significant success given the engagement's logistics. The Battle of Dalith is especially noted, with tactical readouts showing that 5 dreadnoughts supported the final breach into the Tau command dome, sustaining structural damage exceeding 70% while maintaining combat output. During the events of the Badab War, dreadnought deployment reflected each chapter's interpretation of loyalty and control. The Lamenters, despite their reputation for tragedy, fielded 4 dreadnoughts in their defense of the Kairos installation, recorded as silent guardians during the siege's final hours. Contrastingly, the Astral Claws, later to become the Red Corsairs, were noted to have used captured or corrupted dreadnoughts bearing modified identifiers. Administratum scribes debated the authenticity of these units, some suspecting them to be repurposed loyalist sarcophagi. These suspicions led to a forensic review after the war, which confirmed altered runes and unauthorized override sigils. The event became part of the wider study on tech heresy associated with secessionist forces. The Indomitus Crusade under Robert Guillermin reintroduced a standardized protocol for dreadnought deployment across Primaris support chapters. While the majority of Primaris Marines were not initially interred into dreadnoughts, experimental sarcophagus designs developed by Belisarius Cawl began integration in the early stages of the Crusade. The new chassis, referred to as Redemptor dreadnoughts, were heavier, more modular, and carried enhanced power distribution systems. Administratum Mechanics filed comparative combat efficiency charts showing that Redemptors outperformed older Contemptors in sustained fire scenarios but underperformed in close-quarters duels. Tactical assessments advised mixed deployments to balance their respective strengths. The Siege of Gathalamor saw the first mass use of Redemptors, with 17 deployed across 3 chapters, recorded as instrumental in neutralizing the heretic tanks of the Apostate Shield during the city's 5th defense phase. In the later phases of the Indomitus Crusade, as the Imperium Nihilus became increasingly unstable, dreadnought deployment entered a new era of strategic reliance. The Adeptus Administratum's battlefield reports indicate that dreadnoughts, both traditional and Redemptor variants, were designated as primary anchors during the fortification of key supply corridors. One such corridor, the Nemeton Line on the western fringe of Segmentum Pacificus, featured over 20 dreadnoughts deployed across 13 planetary bastions. The War Council of Bastior noted a statistically significant increase in defensive endurance when dreadnoughts were stationed at choke points and command nodes. Vox recordings and telemetric feedback indicate that enemy morale frequently collapsed following prolonged engagement with active dreadnought units, suggesting their psychological value remained as potent as their physical force. The Administratum archives of the Shrine World of Ophelia 7 describe an event during the Secundus Purge where 3 dreadnoughts of the Black Templars held a strategic basilica against a tide of chaos cultists and corrupted PDF forces for 11 continuous hours. The defenders had been reduced to less than 20 Astartes and 3,000 civilian militia. Combat telemetry shows that the dreadnoughts accounted for nearly 72% of confirmed enemy casualties during the engagement. One of these warriors, designated Ancient Marion, had reportedly not been awakened in over 400 standard years. After the battle, he was placed back into stasis, his sarcophagus interred once more beneath the chapter's fortress monastery, with no verbal communication beyond a single phrase, "The shrine endures." One of these warriors, designated Ancient Marion, had reportedly not been awakened in over 400 standard years. After the battle, he was placed back into stasis, his sarcophagus interred once more beneath the chapter's fortress monastery, with no verbal communication beyond a single phrase, "The shrine endures." Outside of Imperial space, dreadnoughts also saw experimental deployment in Frontier and Crusade-era colonization efforts. One such operation was the Loranic Push, a sub-campaign within the wider Angelic Halberd Crusade in the Segmentum Tempestus. Records from the 904th Colonial Compliance Unit document the use of dreadnoughts as planetary shock anchors. Units dropped ahead of the main force to initiate pacification efforts and establish secured landing zones. These dreadnoughts were fitted with drop-shock impact plates and localized gravitational compensators. The Mechanicus patented tectonic stabilizer frame allowed them to withstand impact velocity sufficient to crack meter-thick ferrocrete, effectively letting them function as living orbital rounds. The effectiveness of this tactic was deemed high, though the psychological degradation of some dreadnoughts due to repeated shock insertion prompted its eventual discontinuation for long-term campaigns. The Administratum's records of the Tyrannic Wars, particularly the Second and Third, highlight the evolving role of dreadnoughts against non-humanoid threats. The Ultramarines analysis logs, under the command of Manius Calgar, include detailed schematics showing that Dreadnoughts were particularly effective against mid-tier bioforms such as Carnifexes, Hive Guard, and Trigons. Leviathan-pattern Dreadnoughts, fitted with Gravflux bombard weaponry and reinforced sarcophagi, were used in the defense of Prandium before its eventual fall. One transmission from the Doomed World, preserved in Data Slate Delta 79 Helios, describes a final stand by a trio of Dreadnoughts encircled by Tyrannid swarms. No survivors were found, but the sarcophagi of two ancients were later recovered intact, still broadcasting beacon signals and awaiting extraction long after the world had been stripped to the bedrock. Later engagements, such as the battles on Hydra Caudatus and Medusa 5, further emphasized the Dreadnought's role as an emergency responder and honor guard force. Administratum deployment forms indicate that Dreadnoughts were routinely assigned to defensive reliquaries, chapter keeps and librarius vaults, locations deemed too sacred or vital to lose. In the case of Hydra Caudatus, a Salamander's Dreadnought named Vorkael was recorded defending the gate of the Fortress of Redemption against Iron Warrior's siege weapons. For over 72 hours, his combat logs show constant weapons discharge without external maintenance. His final entry read, "They will not pass this gate while I endure." His shell was later recovered by surviving Tech Marines and reinstalled within a new chassis on Prometheus. The Administratum also oversaw a number of restoration and reactivation projects during the era Indomitus. One such project involved the reawakening of lost Dreadnoughts sealed in catacombs below the ruins of Isfahan 5. These Dreadnoughts, presumed dead for over 10,000 years, were discovered by an Iron Hand salvage detachment. 7 sarcophagi were retrieved, 3 of which still retained functional life support and mental pattern stability. These were carefully restored and reintegrated into their chapter's command structure, though at least one was deemed unstable due to pre-heresy trauma and was voluntarily entombed in silence beneath the tomb of Medusan Wrath. The entire event was classified under the Sigma Crux Archive tag, with restricted access to all data logs outside of Magos Prime clearance. In rare instances, Dreadnoughts have also been recorded in judicial or ceremonial roles. On the death world of Crixos II, a Crimson Fists Dreadnought named Ancient Hallan presided over an honor duel between 2 junior captains over a disputed deployment of chapter resources. The ritual was sanctioned by the chapter master and witnessed by a scribe of the Adeptus Ministorum. Hallan served as both witness and enforcer, his power fist acting as the judgmental hand should dishonor be detected. The event is considered an outlier, but it was entered into the official chapter chronicles and preserved in administratum transcripts for posterity. It also reinforces the Dreadnought's unique position as both warrior and ancestral authority. In rare instances, Dreadnoughts have also been recorded in judicial or ceremonial roles. On the death world of Crixos II, a Crimson Fists Dreadnought named Ancient Hallan presided over an honor duel between 2 junior captains over a disputed deployment of chapter resources. The ritual was sanctioned by the chapter master and witnessed by a scribe of the Adeptus Ministorum. Hallan served as both witness and enforcer, his power fist acting as the judgmental hand should dishonor be detected. The event is considered an outlier, but it was entered into the official chapter chronicles and preserved in administratum transcripts for posterity. It also reinforces the Dreadnought's unique position as both warrior and ancestral authority. In terms of attrition and maintenance, administratum statistics compiled from the Segmentum Obscurus Forge Registry reveal that the average operational lifespan of a Dreadnought chassis is approximately 1,000 standard years before major structural overhaul is required. Sarcophagi, however, often survive longer and are capable of being transferred between chassis if Tech Marine expertise and ritual authorization are available. The Adeptus Mechanicus oversees sarcophagus health via biomonitoring protocols, and failure to comply with data calibration standards can result in disciplinary action, especially in cases where ancient warrior minds degrade into psychosis due to inadequate stasis cycles. Such failures are rare but are documented in incidents labelled silence breach protocols, during which a Dreadnought may act irrationally or attack allied forces. these events are classified immediately and sealed by the Ordo Reductor for theological review. As the Imperium faces an increasingly fractured future, with warp storms isolating sectors and the pressure of Xenos empires mounting, Dreadnoughts remain one of the most enduring elements of Astartes warfare. Their combat data is constantly referenced by the Collegia Strategos, their actions etched into battle liturgies recited by chaplains across 1,000 chapters. Administratum scribes continue to update their records, though many older Dreadnoughts remain silent unless the situation becomes truly dire. Even among the most advanced war machines of the Imperium, few inspire the reverence and quiet fear that a silent ancient warrior, sealed in a walking tomb of adamantium, evokes when the vault doors open and the activation rites begin. There are few war machines in the Imperium that draw more scrutiny from the Inquisition than the Dreadnought. Their ancient minds, their biological fragility entombed in cold metal, and their proximity to millennia-old secrets make them natural subjects of both admiration and suspicion. The Ordo Hereticus has long kept sealed files detailing instances where Dreadnoughts have exhibited behaviors or memories inconsistent with Imperial doctrine, while the Ordo Xenos and Ordo Malleus frequently flag them for review due to the nature of their battlefield exposure. The Inquisition does not treat Dreadnoughts merely as weapons, but as archives unto themselves, archives that may, at any moment, remember something they were not supposed to. One of the earliest redacted events involving a Dreadnought appears in Ordo Malleus archives under the codename Obsidian Tempest. This incident, dated to millennia 36, involved an Ultramarines Dreadnought designated as Ancient Solmeron. Awakened to counter a demonic incursion on Gilead Secundus, Solmeron engaged a greater demon of Slanesh, and reportedly destroyed it in single combat, using a twin-linked las cannon and power claw. However, subsequent reports indicated that Solmeron began speaking in an ancient dialect of Colchetian High Gothic after the engagement, using phrases unknown even to the Adeptus Custodes linguistic vaults. Attempts to debrief him resulted in his immediate shutdown by the attending tech marine. A sealed Ordo Malleus team removed the sarcophagus within 20 hours. The Dreadnought has not been seen since. The Ultramarines maintain that he was destroyed in the line of duty. The Inquisition, however, has labelled the matter unresolved, liminal artifact proximity. Another suppressed dossier revolves around a Dreadnought of the Iron Hands known as Ferric Arath. The subject had been interred since the final years of the Horus Heresy and was considered one of the few surviving witnesses to the fall of Medusa's outer colonies. When awakened during the cleansing of Forge World Van Heska, Ferric Arath issued a series of internal Vox recordings directed not at his chapter, but at a voice labelled Master of the Ash Vault. Inquisitorial analysts reviewing the audio flagged it immediately, citing linguistic echoes matching pre-Unity cultic scriptures once attributed to early Mechanicum sects. The Ordo Reductor was granted full clearance to investigate, and within 72 hours Arath was declared mechanically unstable and removed from active duty. Whether this was due to psychic contamination, machine eco, or another phenomenon remains unknown. His sarcophagus currently resides under lock in Vault 08C of Saturn's shielded ring, guarded by both Iron Hands and Inquisitorial personnel. One of the most disturbing encounters documented by the Ordo Hereticus involves the Black Templars and an event classified as the Torgal Censure. On the Forge Moon of Torgal, an unaligned Dreadnought chassis was recovered from the site of a defunct schismatic Mechanicus cult. Upon recovery, the sarcophagus inside was found to be partially intact but biologically active. What troubled investigators was that the sarcophagus bore no chapter markings, no standard gene seed registry, and its occupant was listed in no known archives. Interrogation by an Ordo Hereticus psyker yielded fragments of a name, Decurion Haranzor, and a reference to the tomb of the Hollow God. Shortly after, all attending personnel were declared compromised due to psychic trauma, and the site was annihilated via orbital lance strike. The Dreadnaught's remains were never catalogued again. The incident is referenced only obliquely in Ordo files as a Category Omega Obscura event. The Black Templars' official stance is that no such operation occurred. Beyond incidents of corruption or secrecy, the Inquisition also monitors the psychological decay of dreadnoughts over time. Despite the revered status of interred warriors, several cases exist in which a dreadnought, exposed to prolonged active duty, entered a state referred to in inquisitorial lexicon as iron despair. This condition, flagged in the records of the Ordo Sepulturum, is characterized by disjointed speech, hallucinated enemy signatures, and obsessive ritual behavior disconnected from current mission parameters. One such case involved a Space Wolves dreadnought, Bjorn the Hollow, not to be confused with Bjorn the Fell-Handed, who refused stasis after a series of engagements with the Necrons on Draven's Hollow. After dismembering 4 captured Necron warriors and arranging their parts in sigil formations across the battlefield, he began broadcasting low-frequency lamentations in Fenrisian Old Tongue. When approached by his own chapter, he warned them not to wake the sleeper beneath the sands. He was forcibly powered down by a combined team of tech marines and rune priests, and has not been reawakened since. The Inquisition now monitors his sarcophagus for signs of latent Xenos psychic interference. The Ordo Xenos has also expressed concern about specific battlefield recoveries involving dreadnoughts during engagements with the Tyranids. A peculiar case from the War of the Depths on Stygia Prime involved a Redemptor dreadnought retrieved after an apparent misjump through the warp. When found, the dreadnought was covered in chitinous residue from an unknown bioform. More troubling were the sigils etched into its inner chassis, anatomically precise Tyranid glyphs typically used in synapse communication. No explanation was ever provided as to how these glyphs appeared inside an Imperium-manufactured war machine. The dreadnought was seized by the Inquisition within 6 hours and transported to a sealed research facility on Borgia Ultima. The Redemptor has not been observed since, though rumours persist of an iron beast being held in the black cells beneath Ordo Xenos watch station Tau Vigilis. Inquisition records also chronicle rare confrontations between dreadnoughts and non-Astartes threats of considerable metaphysical significance. A notable entry refers to an encounter on the world of Kasserine V, where a Dark Angel's venerable dreadnought engaged a Harlequin Shadowseer during a skirmish over a pre-fall artifact. While the dreadnought ultimately emerged victorious, the encounter is noted for a peculiar after-effect. His Auspex arrays continued to register the Shadowseer's presence for over 36 hours post-engagement. Data logs indicate that the machine spirit rejected multiple diagnostic resets, insisting that the Harlequin was within and speaking. Fearing that the ancient warrior's cognitive processes had been compromised by Eldar Warp Illusionary, the Inquisition stepped in. They did not destroy him. Instead, they declared the dreadnought singularly exposed and transferred him to the custody of the Ordo Chronos for further study. His current location is unknown. In some instances, dreadnoughts have served the Inquisition directly. These rare collaborations are usually restricted to Ordo Xenos kill teams or Ordo Malleus, rapid intervention forces. One such operative was a dreadnought known only as Candescent 1, originally a Bloodraven's librarian who fell in battle and was interred into a librarian variant sarcophagus, an extremely rare and controversial practice. According to reports preserved in the Purgatus Vault of Saint, Orion's Bastion, the Candescent One possessed limited psychic potential even within the sarcophagus, capable of manifesting warp fire through specialized node-focusing vents installed by the Mechanicus. During a confrontation with the demon host Nshalgur, he single-handedly sealed a warp rift using both physical and metaphysical force. The Inquisition praised his effectiveness, but later declared the sarcophagus too unstable to remain in Imperial space. It was jettisoned into the edge of the galactic halo zone with a grav anchor and the coordinates sealed. As the galaxy spins further into darkness, the Inquisition's interest in dreadnoughts continues to evolve. No longer simply ancient warriors or relics of honor, they are increasingly viewed as convergent loci, crossroads where machine, memory, and metaphysical exposure combine. Their utility is undoubted, their valor is unquestioned. But behind their adamantine shells lie minds exposed to centuries of combat, sorcery, and secrets not meant to be spoken. The Inquisition watches them, not with admiration, but with preparedness, for the possibility that one day a Dreadnought may wake up, not as a warrior of the Emperor, but as a vessel for something else.